Hey, thanks for stopping by Minnesota Black Robe Regiment here on YouTube and now on Rumble. Well, I have been on Rumble for quite a while. Got an interesting video that we're going to watch. We're going to do the whole thing, but we're going to look at a couple of key points. And one of those key points is going to be the comments made during a public forum held in Rochester by the Rochester or Olmsted County Republican Party for law enforcement officials, and those two officials would be the Sheriff of Olmsted County, Kevin Torgerson, and the Chief of Police of the Rochester Police Department. We're going to take a look at Kevin Torgerson's introduction to himself, or about himself, and then a comment that he makes about his stand on enforcing mandates. So, shall we take a look here?
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. So I just wanted to do a little introduction. Not everybody knows a lot about me or our office. So I'm just going to start with that. So I've been in law enforcement now. This is my 42nd year. That's a bit of an anomaly in law enforcement, the law enforcement world. Most law enforcement officers are able to retire after they get to about 25, 30 years. And then more recently, as a year concerned. But I just love it. It's just been my life, and my family has been huge supporters of it throughout all of that. So my wife Lori and I live down in Stewartville, and we've been here in Olmsted County then for 36 years. Before that, 6 years I was Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, which is Minneapolis. I don't know your geography of Minnesota. So I grew up in Kenyon, Minnesota, up the road about 35, 40 miles, and grew up on a dairy farm. And within, I went to the cities to go to college, and then got the job at Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. It certainly was a change in a lot of things, in a lot of ways, but it was a great experience, and certainly being here was a great experience as well. We have two kids. Our son Nick is now Dr. Nick. He's an oncology doctor working up in the metro area, and our daughter is Marissa, is a Spanish immersion teacher, also living up in the Twin Cities. Both married. Nick has only been able to bless us with our only two grandkids, and I say only because they need to keep that up. But I have no control over that. So that's a little bit about me and where I come from and that kind of bit. As far as our office, we have 194 people.
I want to encourage you to pay very close attention to Torgerson here. And notice how long his intro was about himself. Okay? And now listen to this. And I'll point it out.
Work for the Sheriff's Office, and a lot of people, I think, aren't quite aware of that. But of course, the Sheriff's Office is in the state of Minnesota, were created through legislative action, and some of the mandates that came out of the legislature require us, number one, to have a jail, and do all of those things that are required there. So that then automatically creates one portion of our office. The other side of the office is what we call the law enforcement side, the LEC side, and that obviously does the real cop stuff, I guess.
So focus on that there, okay? That does the real cop stuff. He blew right past his adult detention center staff and went straight to the LEC side, the law enforcement side, where they do the real cop stuff. Okay? Focus on that. And notice how long his intro was about himself, how he blew past the adult detention center side, and dare I say, insulted his detention staff, where he says the real cop stuff.
You could say.
Let's go back just a little bit. Listen.
Were created through legislative action, and some of the mandates that came out of the legislature require us, number one, to have a jail, and do all of those things that are required there. So that then automatically creates one portion of our office. The other side of the office is what we call the law enforcement side, the LEC side. And that obviously does the real top stuff, I guess you could say. And any sheriff is required then to support within their county.
The adult detention center is a burden to Kevin Torgerson. And you could tell that by how he just said what he said. It's a burden. It's a burden. Sheriff Kevin Torgerson said, we're required by law. We're required to have a detention center. In blue, right past it. And now he's going to launch into an eloquent explanation of everything that gets done and everything that is how it's managed for his real law enforcement. His words.
County, all of the areas that are outside of any kind of any city areas that don't have their own local municipal law enforcement. So here in Olmsted County, it's really just us. And then of course our friends with the State Patrol and federal partners and others that come and go, but it's really ourselves and Rochester PD. So the Sheriff's Office with Olmsted County has contracts with the cities of Stewartville, Byron, Dover and Eota. Of course they have their school together. Dover and Eota, and then City of Orinoco. We also have a contract with 3 of the 4 townships that encircle the city of Rochester, and that's Cascade, Haverhill, and Rochester Township. Marion Township is still just a township, and that's kind of how they like to keep it at this point. Some other things that are required and mandates related to the Sheriff's Office that makes us different than a police department, that might be good information and educational for you, is, as I mentioned, detention. We're also required to perform the court security to keep the court safe.
There again, I mentioned detention, didn't talk at all about what the detention center does and what the detention deputies do. And now he's going to launch in to, there again, the real law enforcement side.
And secure in all of its capacity. So every county has a court. It is all state folks. They're all employees of the state. The judges are state employees. But the county, the sheriff, is required to secure all of that and do everything that comes from the courts. So anything like civil papers, all the different papers that have to come down, that have to be served publicly, all the warrants and things like that, regardless if it's our arrest or our PD's arrest, it becomes a warrant, then it becomes the sheriff's responsibility to care for it. Anybody, any law enforcement officer in the county or the state can arrest on a warrant, but it's required of the sheriff to maintain those warrants and work with the court to make sure they're accurate, and all the things that go along with that. Same thing with all the civil papers and things like that go on. The other kind of unique things that probably aren't always thought of with sheriffs is we're also required to have the Navy in the county, in a sense. And Olmsted County doesn't have any natural lakes. We have our man-made lakes, Lake Zumbro and Silver Lake, of course. Of course, we have quarries and retention ponds and everything all dotting all over the place. So we have a dive team. The dive team is basically a dive rescue team. Generally, I don't think we've ever rescued someone in my time here with Olmsted County. It's usually been a recovery of someone who was drowned.
Okay, let this sink in. They're required to have the Navy of the county, and it's a rescue, dive rescue and whatnot. Do you notice how much freaking time Torgerson just spent talking about his county Navy? Do you notice how much time he spent talking about that? Do you see what he did here? This, ladies and gentlemen, tells you how poorly he looks at his detention staff. And I can tell you from almost 13 years of dedicated, faithful service to the Olmsted County Sheriff's Office, Adult Detention Center side of the Sheriff's Office. The Adult Detention Center staff, the deputies in the Adult Detention Center, save hundreds of lives a year. Hundreds of lives a year. They save the taxpayers of Olmsted County millions of dollars a year. Millions of dollars. Again, millions of dollars. But he just spent a massive amount of time in comparison talking about dive and rescue and blew by his detention staff.
Which is obviously a sad day, but the sheriff's office is responsible for being a part of that, as well as water patrol, and then the other fun one is snowmobile patrol. So we patrol the areas that have snowmobile trails and things like that within our county. It's a grant we get from the state, and we do that. And the DNR is out there too. We're teaming up.
And there again, he literally just spent more time talking about snowmobile patrol than he did about his detention staff.
With those guys too, as best we can with those things. Other things I just wanted to mention as far as stuff that's kind of topical for tonight, just to throw some ideas to you, if you come up with some questions that I think is facing challenges for both of us. Training mandates, both post-board and legislative mandates, changes to the laws and how law enforcement is trained, have been very, very high on our list of challenges over the last few years, and keeping track of those changes. And then, let's see, where did I go with that other list? Well, I'll just keep going with what I have written down here. Some of the other things that is, again, important and good for us to know is for our county, and certainly our teamwork with the city, with so many different teams that are joint between us, and which is a good thing, is a co-responder model. And this has been in the news and on the paper, and you've hopefully heard about this, but we have a co-responder team of social workers who are mental health trained, who now are, it started many years ago in our jail, probably close to 20 years ago, where we had mental health social workers in our jail helping with folks that needed that kind of support inside the facility. And we were seeing such great support with it, we moved it and took that one person with cooperation and support from the police department by taking that one person and moving her. At that point, it was a female, and actually she had an office with the police department, and she was going out and riding right along with our folks, and mostly our PD's folks. And then we saw that program really working. There was becoming more and more talk at the state level and the metro that, wow, we need to do some more of this mental health person in crisis. We went to work with our social workers, our county, right with our deputies and officers wherever we go. So, and that's unique. It's not happening.
And there again, he literally spent more time talking about social workers than he did about his adult detention staff. Deputies, sworn deputies inside of his adult detention center. This is where his priorities lie. The public persona of what the public perceives of him and what they perceive of law enforcement. He's treating the adult detention center staff, the deputies that work inside of there, who are in and amongst the criminal element for 12 hours a day while they're working. Violent people who are hell-bent on causing as much trouble as they possibly can, with no chance. These deputies have no chance of getting away from these people. They have to interact with him. He blew right by them, and he blew right by what they do to talk about water patrol and snowmobile patrol and social workers, because those are the hot topics of the day, I guess. I don't know.
In every part of the state. It's getting going up in the metro, but really, I think we have a very good model that we've worked on very carefully here. The other unique thing I think that is important for you to know about us and about law enforcement in these times is we have a great CIT program. CIT is Crisis Intervention Training, and we've been doing it now, I think it's 14 years. We just graduated a class here a couple weeks ago and what that is a class of deputies, both detention, law enforcement, as well as police officers, who spend a week and they learn about all of the different challenges related to mental health, whether it's schizophrenia, whether it's depression, suicidal tendencies, you name it. It's all handled in that week. And then, to me, the real graduation piece of that is we have actors come down the last 2.5 days, And these actors are so real. I sat in on many of those sessions and watched and thought, man, it's so real. And I just worry about those actors that they can recover, because they gotta wind down after that somehow. I don't know how they do it, but I worry about them because they do such a great job and they're so real. But they do such a great job. And so right now, I think between the two agencies, we're both about.
He literally just spent more time talking about crisis intervention training actors than he did about his detention staff. And how worried he is about his detention staff, or about how worried he is about the well-being of the crisis intervention actors than he is about his detention staff. This is what you're dealing with. This is a smarmy, polished politician. That's all he is. He's a smarmy, polished politician. An SPP. All he cares about is how he looks to you. And so he's going to talk to you about those things that he thinks that you consider, or that you consider to be important. His primary focus should be chiefly his oath to the Constitution, to doing the job that he's been elected to do as an elected servant. But then his should be his staff. And he blew right by that, spent most of his time, far more time, talking about snowmobile patrol, water rescue, social workers, and the mental well-being of crisis intervention training actors.
70% or so trained with all the officers. We had to skip last year with COVID because everything got shut down with those kind of group trainings and things like that. But we got back on board again this year. So I think we were actually getting closer to about 80% a year ago, and we lost COVID. And of course, we can only do a certain number at a time because that's another challenge for us. The other things that are challenges for us is the hiring challenges. And one of the other questions that was brought to me beforehand that might be a topical thing you could ask a question about later on is what went on at the county fair this year. It was kind of a hot topic there at the end of July. All I could say is it was difficult. It was difficult in many ways because of the challenges that were there, and mostly the kids, but also young adults. But we're working on that already. Our RPD is a great group of folks at the program that they started. I'll let the chief talk more about that. CERT team, I think that's a great possible avenue for us to use next year with that. And then just going on and meeting with some of the community leaders and helping us navigate through that and get to the parents of kids and get to these young adults and try to get them to understand that the fair is supposed to be a fun and happy place, not a place to come and basically get out your vengeance and revenge on somebody that looked at you sideways in school 6 months earlier. So we'll see how it plays out, but we're really going to do a lot this year to before the fair. It's certainly not 2 weeks before, but all through the year, we're going to keep working on trying to find ways to get around that and hopefully have a really wonderful time next year at the fair. If you have other questions on that later, you can handle that. So I'm going to be done. Chief, it's all yours. And I didn't get the hook.
Well, good evening, Steve.
So we're going to fast forward here just a little bit to a particular question that I think is particularly poignant when we take into consideration the events of October 11th, 2021. So 1 month to the day that this video, 1 month to the day that this video was filmed. Excuse me, we don't use film anymore. We just shoot video. So we're going to skip forward here just a little bit.
This is the most frequently asked. In your functioning as sheriff or chief of
Notice here what the question is. It's the most frequently asked, and it's in your functioning as
police, how do you regard a mandate or an executive order pertaining to public safety? That is, does a mandate or an executive order have the same power of enforcement by your department as a law?
So the question here is, and I'm sorry if I'm cutting it off, but I want to make sure that you hear this. The basic gist of the question is as a sheriff's office or as a police department, do mandates have the same functioning as a law as passed by the legislature? That's the gist of the question. And how are you going to approach that?
Passed by the legislature, or as a right provided in the Constitution does?
No. Mandates, executive orders are not enforceable, not anything that we do. If we're talking about stuff related to COVID and things like that, it's not our job. Our job is to keep the peace. And if there gets to be a point where there's not peace in any kind of a gathering related to any of those things, then we're there to take care of the peace issue. But no, we handle the issues related to laws, statutes.
That's a lie. You hear the person who's shooting the video say, that's a lie. And here's why that's a lie. On October 11th of 2021, deputies, as you'll see in the video that I'll link to this, deputies in the employ under the authorization of Sheriff Kevin Torgerson did, as a matter of fact, in Eyota, Minnesota, at a school board meeting, did remove from the Dover Eyota School Board meeting in the media center citizens, law-abiding, tax-paying citizens who were violating the Dover Eyota School Board mask policy under threat of trespass, and then under the threat of arrest for obstruction, were removed from the school property. Then, several weeks later, I want to say it was November 8th, an individual was met at the door and trespassed, as my understanding, was met at the door and given a trespass for attempting to attend the Dover Eyota School Board meeting without a mask. Now, remember, Kevin Torgerson said, and I'm going to just stop the share here. Kevin Torgerson said that mandates do not have the force of law, and mind you, that they will only be there to keep the peace. Now, I can speak to the reality that they were not keeping the peace on October 11th of 2021 in Dover Eyota School Board meeting. They weren't keeping the peace. John Morozic, Jens Damon, Nicholas Heimer, and Todd Peterson, the school resource officer for the Dover Eyota School District, weren't keeping the peace. They were not keeping the peace because the peace was not being disrupted. Absolutely, people were questioning the ability of the school board to impose a policy on the people in attendance, but there was no disruption of the peace. Kevin Torgerson is a liar, and he twists his words in a way, or he uses his words in a way so as to sound like he's this very constitutionally minded law enforcement officer in the state of Minnesota. But he's not. He's not. He allowed his deputies to violate the constitutional rights of multiple members of the community at a school board meeting for the mere fact that they refused to wear a mask in accordance with a policy passed by a school board. Policy is not law. Policy is not a mandate. Mandates are not law. There is no law that allows somebody to order you to wear a mask. Especially just if you want to make an argument about peacetime emergencies when there is no peacetime emergency in place. Kevin Torgerson, the sheriff of Olmsted County, has tacitly become an enforcement wing for school districts to do what they want done, to silence dissent, to keep people who disagree with a policy from speaking and speaking their minds. Any restriction placed on the First Amendment liberties of citizens, of taxpayers, would be considered prior restraint. Kevin Torgerson is guilty of said prior restraint because he's allowed his staff to work as enforcement arms, once again, I've said this already, of a school district. He's allowed that. And not only has he allowed it, he's ordered it. His staff threatened arrest of me and numerous others for obstruction. Obstruction when there was no obstruction. Nothing that happened that night had any inkling of obstruction according to Minnesota state statute. And I'm going to go back one more time, and I want you to focus on something here. Kevin Torgerson spent all of his time talking about everything but his detention deputies. And they are deputies. They are sworn deputies in the state of Minnesota. They may not have a post license, but they do every bit as much work as the post-certified sworn road officers do in Olmsted County. Undoubtedly. They work with the worst of the worst in their worst moments on their worst days. And Kevin Torgerson didn't describe a damn thing that they do. Not one thing. He literally spent more time talking about everything under the sun except for the bulk of his staff. The bulk of his staff. 99 of his staff members work inside of the adult detention center. 3 of them being civilians, 96 of them being sworn deputies. He spent less than 2 minutes, if my count is accurate. It could be off a little bit. He spent less than 2 minutes on them in everything that he said. And then he flat out lied to you people. He lied to you, and so many of the Republicans applauded. The Republicans of Olmsted County applauded him. Kevin Torgerson doesn't care about his detention staff, and he doesn't care about the Constitution. And as most of you know, you go back and you watch my video, he trod all over my constitutional rights. My constitutionally enshrined and detailed rights.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
He's a megalomaniacal, petty tyrant. All he cares about is his public persona and being polished so that he can maybe win another election.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be
Everything you need to know about him was just said in this video. And you may say, oh yeah, I like what he said. Right. Ask him about his other 99 staff. The people that are in the daily grind, working in and amongst criminals, putting their lives on the line, and saving lives, and saving millions of dollars in potential lawsuits and payouts for the citizens of Olmsted County and the citizens of the state of Minnesota.
Please stand by.
He's a shill.
Stand by.
And until next time,
Please stand by.
6 September.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at